from the public's point of view is like, what are these tools doing, right? Why aren't you using them as an engineer to make better use of, right, taxpayer dollars?
Hey, welcome back to another session of the 21st Century Engineer. We've started a conversation off and on about issues related to people, places, things, technology. And my guest today, Nick Heim, has been investigating, sharing, perceiving a lot about a lot of different topics. I've watched a lot of Nick's podcasts, and I think it's time to turn the tables on him. I invited him to come in and talk with us a little bit. We're going to focus in a little bit on AI and how that's impacting the profession, the engineering profession, the ancillary fields related to civil infrastructure. And so with that, I'm glad everybody could be with us today. Nick, how about taking a little time and kind of overview for those that are listening, who you are, what you're about, and what your background is.
You got it. Thanks, Dennis. Appreciate you taking the time to sit down with me today. But yeah, so like Dennis said, my name is Nick. My background is in civil and structural engineering. So graduated from college about 7 years ago. It'll be this summer. So I've been practicing since then. I currently work as what we call a senior innovation engineer at Structure Care. And Structure Care is essentially a turnkey maintenance company, and we focus on parking structure maintenance and restoration. So prior to my current role, which I'll get to in just a second here, was in the field doing investigations, reports, design documents, overseeing repairs. And today I've kind of taken a step in somewhat of a different direction, but in the same field, to an innovation engineer, which is all about people, process, and technology, and just doing everything we can to streamline the business and its operations. And as Dennis also alluded to, I do host a podcast that focuses on all things engineering and technology, specifically civil. But if you're listening and aren't civil or structural, by no means is it just kind of precluded to that. So we try to do as much as we can to educate the industry.
And what's the name of your podcast, Nick?
The name is the AEC Engineering and Technology Podcast, which is hosted by the Engineering Management Institute.
Right. And we'll give you a chance to plug it again at the end. We'll be less shameless about it maybe a little bit later on. Hey, to get us started in the conversation, you and I've shared some thoughts, and both collectively and independently, about what engineering is. And I started out in structural engineering, lasted about 10 seconds, a bit of an exaggeration. It might have been 20, and decided that structural engineering just wasn't for me. Environmental engineering, water resource, I even did some geotech. I've done 3 structures in my entire life, and I had somebody check my work there. So, but to the credit of the structural engineer, they've been early adopters of technology. They've pushed the curve. I mean, I'd go all the way back to the early 90s when RISA and STAD and all of that was coming along, and computer-aided design and drafting systems were coming along. It was structural engineers that were embracing that. Could you give me some perspective, or give us some perspective as to what you see this profession being, or what the impact of technology might be on this profession?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think when you get people from outside the industry who are building tools or products, for engineers, structural is an easy one, I think, to go after, because when you look at it from just the nuts and bolts of the profession, it appears to be very quantitative in nature, which it is. But the idea being, if we're talking about the codes, it's very prescriptive, right? It's relatively easy to teach a computer what to do and how to, basically what we do as human structural engineers. I agree with that to some extent, but I also think that just based on how people are at the center of all this, I think humans are here for the long run, and the profession is only going to continue to be more people centered. And if you think about what these technologies, right? Whether you're talking about finite element methods and all the commercial software packages that have come out as a result, right, allow us to do more with our time in various ways. And I think one of those being either client interaction, training others, or just, being people and having people at the center of everything. So I think where the profession is going, Dennis, to answer your question more directly, is being able for the individual structural engineer to do more with themselves, but I don't see them being cut out of the equation by any means.
Couldn't agree more. In fact, that was the conversation, again referencing back to the early '90s, where we're not going to need structural engineers more. We're just going to plug the data into a program, and of course, we all know that was it. Just was nearsighted. It was ill-informed. I won't say uninformed.
Yeah,
And
and even Dennis, just like looking at it from just the way our legal system is set up at state levels and licensure, and there are a couple things at play that could change that. I just think that there are a number of different things that happen like societally, in terms of the law, the context, the profession, before we could even get to that point realistically. So just talking about the way the current system is set up doesn't really lend itself well to us going away as a profession.
well, I imagine most of the listeners have at least heard to some degree the conversation about autonomous vehicles and who's responsible if an autonomous vehicle hits a kid in a crosswalk. Is it the designer of the car? Is it the person sitting in the car? And the reality is the law, and in many ways, even the technology, haven't come up to speed with what they do. And at the same time, you mentioned quantitative analysis. I think one of the big breakthroughs that's occurred here recently, and recently has been any time in the past 10 years, is the qualitative aspects, not just handing a system, a computer program, we call them AIs these days, but it's a computer program, and saying, here's the numbers, crunch of them. But now we're looking at it and say, here's the question, research it, find it, and answer it. And that's a very different question. I think, in my perspective, I think that's generating a certain level of distrust because when you're putting the numbers in, you have an expectation as to what's going to come out. But when all you're doing is asking the question, the biases and ethics and the rest that involved in developing that response is kind of out of your control. Do you agree?
I do. And if you think about, Dennis, the technology that's we've been afforded to as a profession to date, right? Quantitative and deterministic. So if I go into my structural analysis software, right, although, I haven't done stiffness matrices since grad school by hand, right? You can go back and like you can do it by hand. It's not the most complicated thing necessarily, but it is tedious, time consuming, hence why we have the software.
Right.
But they're deterministic outputs. You put in the same boundary conditions, loads, etc., and you get out the same response. I think artificial intelligence, pretty widely accepted to be non-deterministic, as in you can give the thing the same prompt. That's kind of like talking to, right, real intelligence. You might get two different AIs, two different answers, two different humans, two different answers. So that's, I think, part of what breeds the mistrust. There's also a number of other things like context, sources, the way these models are designed, which to me leads to a pretty basic point, right? Like don't don't trust it without human oversight. Just like we've been all taught, right? The profession was brought up on garbage in equals garbage out. Just because you have a computer with fancy software doesn't mean you trust the results. I think you have to apply the same skepticism and scrutiny to the technology that's new to us as a profession today.
Right. Trust but verify
Hmm.
is what we've said for decades. You can trust it to do what it is it's supposed to do, but verify that it did what you wanted it to do.
And Dennis, how do we do that, right? You get somebody, right, much like yourself, has a lifetime of experience, has been in the game for a while and knows what they're doing, right? Like you can't just expect a new graduate to come out and just know everything right off the bat. It's right. We essentially we work in a trade, and it takes time to develop experience and judgment. And unless Dennis, I can just reach over to the screen, take your brain and put it in mine. Until we can do that, you just
You
can't
wouldn't want it.
shortcut
That's
experience.
okay. Yeah. Yeah, I can ship it to you. It's not a big loss. Uh, but exactly correct. It's not about just. I had a situation when I was an instructor where we gave some students some information, and they calculated the deflection in a 10-foot beam, and the answer that the program gave them, because of a small typographical error, was equivalent to the distance from here to the moon. And it was like half the class turned it in, the other half showed up at the front door going, "This can't be right." So just don't take it on face value. Use a little intuition, use a little expertise, and validate. And if you don't have the expertise, ask. Rely on other individuals. And that brings us then it really full circle to the point you were making at the outset, is that the professional has a role in this. That role is to validate that the right software, the right AI is being used, that the right choices are being made, the right contingencies, constraints are being applied. And then, whereas, as you suggested, an engineer might use the same, let's say, structural design for a bridge over and over again, AI might come in and make a suggestion for an alternative design. And it may be better, it may be worse, it may be equivalent, but it's going to take the individual to look at it and say, yeah, that we didn't have that boundary condition, or whatever.
Mhm.
Uh, in that regard, what I'm hearing you say is you feel that the professional's responsibility to the public isn't going to go away. In fact, if anything, it's going to be more complicated.
I would agree with that entirely. And then you could also start asking questions, from the public's point of view, is like, what are these tools doing, right? Why aren't you using them as an engineer to make better use of, right, taxpayer dollars and other resources? So I think I would agree that the professional's responsibility will still be there, as it has been for the entirety, as long as we've had the profession. It will change, and I would just encourage anyone who's interested to just do your due diligence like you would any piece of software or any technology. I wouldn't at either end of the spectrum, whether people are blindly trusting it, saying it's the greatest thing since sliced bread, or are just outright saying no thanks. I think both approaches are. I think they're intellectually lazy, and that's coming from someone who really thinks the technology has potential. But I think being at either end of the extremes isn't a great thing.
Yeah, I right on point. I couldn't agree with you more. The one conversation, kind of staying with that thought just a little bit, that I've had recently, and I made a presentation at a meeting last week, and got some feedback. And one of the comments that was made was that the public perceives AI as a way of allowing engineers to be commoditized. Now you're driving the car. You didn't design the car, you didn't build the car. Now you're just driving the car. So why am I paying you the kinds of fees that engineers deserve? And of course, as we're saying, that the engineer is doing more than driving the car. They're applying judgment and expertise to the environment in which they're operating that vehicle to ensure they're protecting themselves and the public in general. And do you could you see AI ever getting to the point where professionals would be commoditized or put on a shelf or dismissed, replaced?
I mean, I think commoditization of the profession has been going on a long time,
Correct.
and it's been a topic of discussion. But part of that is a technical problem, but also part of it is, I think, like a social slash selling problem. So, for example, if your client just sees you like every other structural engineer, right, regardless of AI, and they right, like they're lay people, they can't understand or differentiate between two structural engineers. Their websites look the same, their proposals look roughly the same, and it's hard for them to differentiate. Now, colleague of mine runs a great firm up in the Boston area. And their value proposition to developers is a secondhand look at structural systems. And what they commonly find are some pretty significant savings in cost of structure. Let's say it's a couple percent, and maybe it's multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars up, million to, just depending on the size of the project, right?
Right.
So what do you think, Dennis? I mean, like if I can say, yeah, we can save 1.5% of your hard cost to 3%. I mean, does that fee sound unreasonable to you?
No, of course not, because that's my value proposition as well. In fact, I did a project where I can't go into a lot of detail, but I did a project, came in and saved company $99 million. And I found that the policy, the practice in the country that I was working in was that the industry was supposed to split the savings with the design engineer and pocket the other half. I'm still waiting for that check. So, but
Yeah,
but
and
yeah, you should. It's a value. It's but people want to commoditize. Oh, you worked X hours, so that's all I should pay you for. No, what you paid me for was my expertise. So it only took me X hours to do this work, and you get a better product. The other side of this too is, and my argument, particularly with regard to AI, because of its promise in potential, in the likelihood it's going to provide a better end product, something that has fewer mistakes, something that addresses codes more effectively, something that allows the engineer really to, in a shorter period of time, look at more what ifs. You're getting better value
Mhm.
because of the AI. And that value should not be given away. The engineer should share and capture some of that value in recognition of their hard work. So if you're saving somebody 1.5%, why shouldn't you get 0.5%
yeah,
or a third of that? You know,
and and what if a business model, Dennis, is like, hey, like there's going to be, say, just some flat fee just to cover some operating costs, right? Like there's no profit baked in or anything like that, and you just straight up tell your client, hey, like unless you win, I don't win either. And if we find 1%, right,
right?
what a percent savings, what if we just recapture whatever the number is, 20%, 25%? Because then like, to me it's a no-brainer, right?
Well, I
and
still like
and
my 33%, but anyway,
and whatever the number happens to
yeah,
be, but
it is. Yeah,
here's the thing about commoditization and differentiation. Can that client go find another structural engineer with that exact business model that will agree to do their project in like whatever their area is, and basically shop a lower fee? Well, the first problem is there is finding a comparable business model, because if everybody else is running on something hourly and there's this one gentleman who just happens to have this unique business model, you're no longer a commodity.
right, 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 exactly. And again, you have nothing to lose. What you've done is you've either gotten validation, you've got the best design, or you end up with a better design.
Yeah,
So
and
it, so
and
you
may,
really,
and maybe you paid, right, like whatever the fee structure is, maybe you paid a little bit more on the fee for the peace of mind, and can almost guarantee you they're probably going to find something.
oh yeah, yeah. But you'll make it up on the back end in terms of quality of the product or its life cycle cost, uh,
Mm-hmm.
or some aspect. I mean, there's a lot of opportunities here, and again, just peace of mind to know that what you've got has been vetted, and so therefore, the likelihood there's going to be problems during the construction phase or the operation phase seems diminished, would be diminished. Let's kind of pivot here just a little bit along that line. Let's go back to the technology side or the process side of what we're talking about. And we've all grown up with the concept of garbage in and garbage out.
Mm-hmm.
This idea that we have this technology that everybody's wanting to embrace. Not everybody's understanding it, and worse, not everybody understands how to use it. Could you speak to that issue, and what you see the danger of the profession is if we have too many people jumping on board that aren't doing their homework in order to use it properly?
Absolutely, Dennis. I like to call it falling asleep at the wheel, which
Yeah.
is, right, like you say you use any of these large language models where the user interface, it's basically a chatbot, right? And you try it out and it summarizes a quick meeting nicely for you. It writes a great email. It takes some rambling email that you got from your colleague and distills it down into really nice bullet points, right? and it does this great job. And one day you just forget how to do stuff, right? Like you notice your skills are declining a little bit and you're just relying on this thing too much. So you, I think that if people jump on board with this without end goals in mind, some training, and then essentially like what am I trying to get out of this thing? Then you're going to be destined for failure, right? Could you just imagine handing just a junior engineer just a software package, no instruction manual, and just tell them to figure it out? Like, yeah, they might and they probably will with a lot of pain along the way.
Or a lot of failure,
Yeah, and
which is really the pain.
and part of what our responsibility is as engineers who have been in the game, at least, right? Like I'm still a beginner myself, even after 7 years in the profession, right? It's just the nature of the business.
Right.
So I think we have a responsibility to our colleagues, whether it's, so for example, right, we're having this conversation because I'm big on the technology. I love teaching my senior guys like that have been in the game a while. Hey, like, did you take a look at this? Could we do it a different way using some of the newer technology? And that's great in return for me because they're teaching me about the profession and now I can give something back to them.
Right. Well, and to that end, Nick, when we started this podcast, the target market, if you want to call it a market, I mean, are individuals like yourself, entry level, post entry level, mid management, for the reason that we want to see people like you who embrace the technology, see the opportunities to do better, faster, more sustainable, more robust, more resilient systems that what I have often referred to as the dinosaurs don't want to do because they're either afraid of AI or they're afraid of new, or what they want to do because of simply the profit margin is dust off the last project that looks like this and change the cover sheet. And and using 19th century technology applied and improved through the 20th century is not where we need to be today. We need to be moving forward faster, coming up with better solutions. I visited China many years ago and went across a bridge. My one structure story. And they were bragging on how they had taken the design the Russians had given them for a bridge over a different river, except this river was 4 times as long. So they took all the members horizontally and multiplied by 4, and all the members vertically and multiplied by 4, and all the members laterally and multiplied by 4. And that was the only design they did. And to which I said, I'm glad I'm not going back across the bridge.
Well, and so like we talked about, back of the napkin, right?
Yeah,
Like gut checks. Like if you just go back to your basic formulas from statics and mechanics and materials, you'll find that certain parameters are not linear, right, Dennis? Right?
exactly.
They're
Yeah,
to the second, third, fourth, fifth power, and if you slept through a statics lecture, you would you would know that, right? And that's just the thing. But taking that example, which is great, like which is great because like you've fallen asleep at the wheel and you're doing the profession an injustice by not using what we've got between the ears to actually make sure things work.
right, right. Yeah, and I had the unfortunate charge of teaching mechanics and materials for a little more than a year. Um, Not my area. In fact, when the department had asked me to do it, I said, I'm an environmental engineer. Why mechanics? He said, because I asked you to. And that ended the conversation. Uh, uh, well, you do what you got to do. Uh, uh, Firms, consulting firms in particular, or again, going back to this evolution we're going through right now, are looking for glitz. I'm gonna call it. In other words, they're looking for things that make them stand apart. And I think what we're seeing in some cases is the technology becomes more of a marketing tool than a solution to the question. And I'm just wondering if you've had any exposure or seen anything similar along this idea that uh, they're kind of force fitting technology into the firm's operation.
Absolutely. It happens all the time. And I think, Dennis, where it begins, or there's a couple of ways I've seen it done. So, for example, like a higher up might just get wind of something that looks cool. And then it kind of becomes a, hey, why do we use this piece of our tech stack? Because so and so said so 3 levels up and nobody asked. That's one piece of it. Another piece is like, it's kind of like a doctor going in and only looking at your knee, right? And the rest
Yeah.
of you is covered up by a blanket and makes a diagnosis based on what they just see in the knee. When they pull the cover back, they found your knee was fine and the problem was actually somewhere else in the body, right?
Yeah.
It's what
Right.
firms do when you go firefighting and it's like we have this problem and this problem and this problem instead of a holistic process review, right?
Right.
And what I mean by that is going from how did you get in touch with a potential client all the way through that process and that journey that then takes them to closing out a project, right?
Right.
And I say that because it's people dictate process and then process dictates the technology. To your point about marketing, right? Like all this stuff can look really cool, that's great. If it doesn't deliver value to the business, big whoop.
It can even
I'm
distract. I mean, it can be a diversion from doing the right thing. And again, using your what you've just said, it can be a diversion to people to not define the process, just apply the technology. It,
You got
it's
it.
it's the old adage of I've got a solution. Let me go find a problem to apply it to, and it may not always be the right problem.
Solution in search of a problem,
Right.
and chasing after bright lights and shiny objects. But actually, one use case that I have talked to colleagues about, like if you go to a firm and there's an innovation page, or principals are posting about what they're doing, is actually recruitment. Because you've heard the story, right? You get out of college, you're used to this cutting edge technology, you know doing hearing more about modern software technology, whether it's AI or not, and then you come into a firm and it's like you've just been pulled back in the past by a quarter century. And
Sorry.
that
Get
I've
through.
talked to
Get through.
colleagues and friends that are a little bit younger than I am, 0 to 3 or 5 years out of school, and one thing they look for is like, hey, am I going to go work somewhere that's forward thinking and actually gives me the tools to do my job? So all this technology stuff, right?
Yeah.
It can be a great recruiting tool for like the the young minds that are going to be the engine of your firm for years to come. And I'll actually say, like flat out, like clients, like you may get an innovative one, but frankly, right, it's like, why did they hire you? To get a job done, take it off their plate, and meet whatever business metrics, whether that's financial, operational, or just take this off my plate, I don't want to deal with it.
Right.
Why do they care about what you use specifically unless it meets their objectives, which it absolutely can, and that's why we do it regardless, which we can get into more detail about.
Yeah, I want to amplify something you said, and particularly because of my academic background. I talked a lot to students, particularly specifically those who are looking for jobs, entry level positions. And it's a matter of not being interviewed. It's a matter of going, preparing, and doing the interview. What is the environment like? What's the company's philosophy with regard to what my first job will be? Uh, what kind of support can I expect? I've seen some pretty staid consulting firms in this area, where the first job the graduate engineer did was operate CAD, sit on the CAD machine for 6 months while their technical skills atrophy and their expertise and that's been imparted by the faculty and whomever else co-oping whatever, it kind of slides away simply because that's how the boss started 50 years ago. I started
And
at the drafting table. By Jovies, you're going to start on a drafting table too.
and that and Dennis, the more I find myself like in the profession, I think, so for anything that can be considered timeless, like basically anything that's wisdom, right? Like absolutely go to your principal who's like a year or two from retirement, because that is a wealth of knowledge that's about to walk out the door.
Right.
and can really help you out. But if it's like if it has anything to do with like an advancement that's more modern at like a nitty gritty level that like your senior principals probably aren't going to be as involved in unless they're making themselves involved in, it's okay. Like you can go to somebody who's a couple years ahead of you and a couple years behind you, but you don't like. I think it's going to different types of people with different types of skill sets depending on what you need.
Exactly on point. If I'm trying to get a perspective of professional development or project management or how a business operates and how you do business development, how you conduct yourself in a meeting environment, you want somebody that's been successful in that. That's probably the senior management. I said administration, back to the academic world. And at the same time, if you want somebody that's competent in today's technology, it's not likely they're it. The presentation I referenced earlier, some individuals are commenting about a particular data set and why the performance of people 10 years and above with regard to graduation, 10 years past graduation, performance on this particular metric was pretty lousy. And I turned around and looked at the 60 people, right at 60 people in the room. And I said, okay, that last statistic's talking about you people. So if I asked you to perform that, how would you do? And they kind of went, oh, okay, yeah, now I understand.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm not I'm not the technically savvy person I maybe should be, but certainly could be. And yeah, that's not me. So anyway,
And here's the beautiful thing, Dennis, it doesn't have to be, because
exactly.
why do I want my senior principals spending time on figuring out what the latest and greatest technology is? I want them to help me go vet it and give me that timeless information that helps me get to where I need to go.
Sure.
I also don't need them to know the nitty gritty and the inner workings unless they want to. And I actually have a few mentors who are like that, right? 30 plus years of experience, and they're just down in the trenches with me. But it's what they love to do.
Well, and I plead guilty to that myself. I mean, I've been through a couple different careers and had a lot of other things, but this issue of AI and its ramifications in our profession is something that truly does interest me. That I want to support and be involved and learn more about. Now, do I want to write code? No. I didn't want to write code 20 years ago, and I don't want to start now. I joked with my daughter, who's a data scientist for DOE, that she was handed a project where she had to convert a program that was written in Fortran
Mm.
over into modern language. And I said, "Well, I can do half the job. You're going to have to figure out how to do the other half." I didn't get the job. Oh, anyway, and that's fine. I got enough to do on my plate. But with that, I want to focus a little bit more back on this technology before we run completely out of time, and that is that uh, we use the word AI, the initials AI or artificial intelligence. We talk about big data. We talk about supervised, non-supervised data crunching, data analysis, machine learning. There's a lot of jargon out there running around, and I keep wanting to distill it back down to these are just computer programs. As I said at the outset, the biggest difference to me between AI is the array or the database or however you want to think of it that it's using to generate its answers. A lot of times it's not generated by us, it's generated by others, and it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. Am I correct? I mean, is AI, when we get into this, is this just hype? Is this just another marketing tool rather than just calling it a computer program? It's got to have something glitzy, or is there something substantive in your perspective and in your applications as a technology?
Yeah, and it's a great question, Dennis. And I will say, like anything, right, there's going to be people who know how to market, right, know how to play to human emotions and psychology, which, by the way, haven't really changed much because we don't evolve that quickly as a species,
Right.
and can make a lot of money in the process. So there's definitely a hype piece to this. And I'm forgetting the name of the curve where technology starts and then there's the trail of disillusionment and then it actually comes up, and right, like we've it's not the first technology that has or will do something like that.
Right.
But in terms of something substantive, Dennis, I think you have
It's,
to look at,
it's just like nobody knows what MySpace is anymore. Yeah, it's been replaced by the next generation and moved on. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
yeah, and where I was going was to me it's just about it's about workflows and process that is realistic. And what I mean by that is like we don't have to talk about like the hype of AI, we just show. So for example, if you spend a lot of time just writing emails and you can have a small agent come in and in your style and tone help you write emails better or faster, that's a use case. What about reports or correspondence to clients or whatever the case may be? It starts with a use case. And if we're going to operate under the assumption that many firms out there are not trying to blow up their business model overnight to become an AI first firm, at least not in our industry. So it goes back again to process mapping. Let's map out the process from beginning to end in regards to like how do you make money as a company, and
Sure.
then what can we attack or the low hanging fruit. And I think one of the basic things is just basic AI training. What's Copilot? How do you use it? What are
Yeah.
some use cases? What are
Yeah.
some prompts? Can like even Dennis, even if it's just the very basic stuff. There's a colleague of mine who actually wrote a book. It's called Finding 12 Minutes a Day. And the reason you do that, 12 minutes a day, 5 days a week, an hour times 50 hours a week, right?
Yeah.
What's your billing rate? Okay. Now you can start to see like from the hourly billing model whether or not you agree with that. It's just, common in our industry. I think breaking it down by that makes it simpler for firm leaders to understand that if you can use the technology literally to find 12 minutes a day, and I think that's light because I think there's a lot more out there, then okay, there's an ROI. Now, is AI the only thing that needs to be done? No, I think there's other things like streamlining and automation that aren't really AI. They're different technologies, which is why I like to just say technology and AI is just a subset of that, because some firms aren't ready for AI, aren't going to want to use it for whatever reason, but it's not the only show in town, let's say.
It isn't. And while it provides an opportunity for some, maybe because of the nature of the work some firms do or some individuals do, or the repetitiveness or lack of repetitiveness of some work, if you only do one advanced structure a year, then coming up to speed on AI is probably not the answer. If you're doing one advanced structure a month, now you're pushing out 12 of those puppies, maybe 15, and it's probably going to ramp up as you continue to do it. Now that AI has a larger role to play. And that then brings me really to one of my last questions, that is the impact, really the proliferation of AI in the workforce. We are right now, there's a lot of debate right now about how large a role AI is going to play in the engineering environment. This is being motivated in part because of the promises that AI appears to have, compounded by the workforce development issues we're having right now. We're not graduating enough engineering students in the United States to meet the demand. We're not educating them fast enough, focused enough. So we've got a shortfall, and we've also got, you talked briefly about those individuals well into their career. They're beginning to roll out. They've held on for longer than 30 years, 40 years, even longer than that. But the time will come when they roll out, matriculate, if you rather. And so AI is being touted by some as a way of plugging that gap. What are your thoughts?
I think it has a role to play, but like everything, we just need to be careful. So a great example, Dennis, is if you it's becoming a common story in our industry, but it was one of Thornton Tomasetti's best engineers. I believe his specialty was welding, and they essentially made a digital twin of him. And the guy himself rated it. I want to say it was maybe like a 4.7 out of 5. So a couple of things here, right? morally and ethically, the guy was okay. The engineer was okay with them doing this. So they crawled through, his emails, documents, all types of correspondence, etc., and basically made a digital twin of this engineer. And he passed, I think, I want to say within the past year or so. But to this day, people can still ask that digital twin or that replica of that engineer questions. I can't speak to how others are using it or what they think of it, but it's just one example of how do you take the knowledge of someone before it all just walks out the door and they retire? Can you, as a senior engineer is winding their career down, are there certain questions we can ask them to gather all this institutional knowledge that can, be used for the future? And that also brings up some questions on, hey, like my employment agreement said this was, I worked this many hours, I get paid this much. Now you're using my knowledge in perpetuity, right? So I think it needs to be the right setup between firm and engineer to actually use it.
Yeah, though along that same line, is AI really the repository for those perspectives, or is that something best passed on to the next human being, which has been the history of our profession? That corporate knowledge gets moved down, if it gets moved down from by oral repetition and example and training and molding of individuals, not the AI. Not saying that's not going to be there, not saying that's not going to be there, but the question then becomes where should that? Because then now all of a sudden, if the AI is providing that intuitive, um, softer side, um, professional side, if you rather than the technical side. Uh, where's the checks and balances? Where's the humility? Where's the interaction with other human beings that allows it to continue to grow? Because if you talk to
Yep.
the person that's at the end of their career, they haven't stopped learning. It's just the way and what they're learning is different than what it would have been at the beginning of their career.
And I'm with you. And what if AI was just this passive thing, right? So you as that senior engineer passing that knowledge down to one of your colleagues, right? But
Right.
then the system just is sitting there passively and collecting the information. So that a second younger engineer who wasn't part of the conversation on that given day could come in and access it. So I don't think you're teaching the AI for the AI's sake, but it's more of making use of, say, those one-on-one conversations or
Right.
information that otherwise would have been siloed between two people and making it available to
Yeah.
everybody else.
Yeah. I'm with you on that too. Well, we've pretty much run out of time. Would love to go on for perpetuity, but we can't. If for other reason, then we just only have so much time in the day. You've got things to do, and I really do appreciate you taking time to be with us, be with me today to have this conversation and impart your experiences, your perspectives, so that I could learn from them, may or not. Uh, you have any closing remarks? Any key ideas or thoughts you'd like to share with regard to the conversation?
Yeah, thank you, Dennis, for having me on. This has been an absolute pleasure for me to get to, speak to another colleague in the profession about something I'm really passionate about. But yeah, I like I'd say, for people, process, technology, in that order. People are at the center of it. If anyone tells you that, engineers are going away tomorrow, I would question that, and I would question and scrutinize that really heavily. I would also say that the experienced people in our industry and that we call them the gray hairs or the brain trust, whatever you want to call them, I think they're going to be more valuable than ever. So you know respect your senior engineers because they bring a lot to the table. um, and and look, like, and I say that from experience. I once upon a time I was a 22-year-old who thought they knew everything, but through life and experience you get humbled and you learn why it takes so long to make a career. And there are things we can do to expedite that process. But look, you just can't shortcut experience today. So just value those who are willing to help you out with it.
Thanks, Nick. And to take off just briefly in that direction, if we have any dinosaurs listening in, given my I is one, so it's important for us to listen to individuals in your position with your experience, your perspective, so that we understand what the motivations are, what the interests are, what the limitations are, so that we continue much like what the professional engineering model does. It's supposed to be a matter of tutoring and supervising and developing the workforce. And AI is not going to change that. AI may facilitate that, but it's not going to change that responsibility to make sure that I thought you were going to say the old gray hairs or the senile members of our profession give back and make sure that that these lessons learned do in fact continue, and so that the next generation can be even more successful than the last. Folks, for those of you that are with us again today, I hope you found the conversation as enlightening and as engaging as I have. Nick's a really great resource. I invite you to go over and look at watch his podcast, sign in, watch what he's doing. And that podcast, one more time, Nick, is
The AEC Engineering and Technology Podcast, hosted by the Engineering Management Institute.
okay. And by now their fingers have jammed on the browser trying to search. So we've given you 2 shots at getting that done.
I feel, Dennis, I feel an uptick in page views already. I can sense it.
You're welcome. Anyway, folks, take care and hope to see you at the next podcast. Until then, be safe.
Thanks, Dennis.
Thanks for listening to the latest episode of the Infrastructure Network.